Greetings, Darklings, from across the interweb. It is I, the Duchess Precious Ken. First off, we're going to start out with our first Sounds and Shadows public service announcement. Kids, drinking, it'll get you. It'll get you bad. And I might have gone at it too hard last night, and I'm paying the price, and I'm here to say the booze, don't do it. First up, I have an unboxing before we get to our amazing guest here, and that is I was sent over the House Arcana collection here, and I'm really excited to dig into this. It's a huge, quadruple CD, just full of some of the best in modern electronica and industrial. Some right off the bat that I'm seeing, we have Curse Mackie, we have Covenant, we have Suicide Commando, Gothsicles, just all kinds of amazing stuff on this amazing 4-disc set. Expect for me to have a review of this up soon, but everybody go get a chance to check that out. That is Passing Strangers from Rex. Okay, now we're doing something a little different today, and I'm really geeked for it. We're not interviewing a band, but we're interviewing somebody in the scene, and I want to start doing some of these topical discussions that I think relate well and have something to do with the scene. And so today's topic is horror movies. The macabre, the darkness. This is something that always has been kind of closely tied, both in literature, film, TV, to the goth scene. Music takes influence from that. It takes influence from music. It goes both ways in a wonderful synergy. And I wanted to get somebody that I feel like is a real expert in our scene on what's happening in modern horror, does things with, makeup, special effects, body modification, things like that, and how that plays in the scene, and have a discussion about it. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend Stacy. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Well, other than self-inflicted whiskey wounds, I'm doing good. So today, instead of my normal beer when I'm doing this, I'll be drinking this big fuck off mug of tea. So, Stacy, let's start out by, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you kind of became enthralled or really got into this idea of horror or being scared for pleasure as part of a genre, and why that spoke to you and really became something that was then an intricate part of your life.
Well, that's going back to a lot of films I grew up watching. I did a whole list of movies and horror movies that inspired me over the years, just molding me as a kid. Now, you would think horror movies and children really, it's not a good mix because it scares the hell out of people, especially if you're a kid. There's a lot of not suitable for children kind of movies that I've watched. Sure. And there's a lot of things I probably shouldn't have watched. But as far as it molding me, going back to some of the classics like Nightmare on Elm Street, that was a huge pivotal movie that scared the hell out of me, but also made me laugh because there's a juxtaposition between horror and comedy, and I try to bring that with a lot of the things that I do, like something like Tom Savini would do as far as using any of the practical effects that he would use for comedy purposes or bits, if you will. So he was one of the main inspirations just growing up watching some of the films that he's done. And at the time, I didn't know who it was until I got older and was able to research who the artists were.
Sure.
Rick Baker is another one. He's another inspiration as far as a FX artist. He's iconic for, Michael Jackson's Thriller, doing the werewolf in
American Werewolf in London. He also did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, right? Or the first couple. Yeah. I think I love that you said that. And I think that also kind of ties into us at our page, because I always think of goth having kind of a close tie to also being able to, I don't know, have a laugh at itself. Like there has to, the sheer like level of the melodrama in it, I think ties well to that. And I think that's part of the horror theme too. Whether, yeah, you're talking about trauma films or a lot of over the years, horror has a bit of humor is mixed in, I mean, even in something like you said, other iconic ones like Friday the 13th or what have you, they always would kind of throw in this character that was a comic relief at least once. It's like such a trope in modern horror and old horror.
Because it's trying to take you out of like what reality is. Like, yeah, there's a lot of modern horrors that people have to go through. Like, but movies in general, it's supposed to be entertainment. Oh, excuse me. That's because the dogs decided to come downstairs while I'm doing this.
That's right. We're an animal friendly show.
Very happy about that. So that's a bit of horror for you. But as far as like movies and all that stuff go, yeah, there's supposed to be more elements of comedy to them, so it's less. Sorry, hold on, let me get myself situated here. There's more elements of like horror and comedy juxtaposed together.
Yeah,
just because it's not supposed to be real. You're not supposed to think that this is supposed to be real. Although there are horror movies that are like the found footage. That's actually pretty fun.
Sure.
That's extremely sorry, I'm gonna back up a little bit. I got myself distracted because of the dog.
But no, I think that it goes well that, just like I said, with music, you're going to have a gradients to some horror movies that are very much, they're there to terrify you. That's the goal, is to be very serious, very atmospheric, very frightening. And then you've got, like I said, the other side of that spectrum, like a trauma film or something that is supposed to be particularly goofy and over the top. And both are good and both are enjoyable, but kind of in different ways. So I think it only makes sense that horror, just like anything else in life, has kind of a spectrum that way.
Yeah, I'm like a huge fan when it comes to, like splatter or gore horror. Like the slasher films are like one of my favorites. I mean, obviously I have a lot of slashers tattooed on me, but Leatherface being one of my favorites. But as far as like any kind of like serious horror, like serious horror is fine, especially like the A24 kind of horror. It's more subconscious and it really like messes with your thinking.
Sure.
And the soundtracks for them are absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
So as far as when it comes to horror and industrial music, that's existed for a very long time. Like as far as like movies like Spawn, Book of Shadows, Saw, Resident Evil, The Queen of the Damned, Underworld.
Sure.
They've used a lot of like industrial tracks. Or you can even go back as far as like using people like Coil or Charlie Clouser or Trent Reznor, who's obviously in industrial bands, but they specifically made soundtracks that are unsettling for horror movies. So there is definitely a tie between horror and industrial music. I mean, you can go back to Alien Sex Fiend and using people like Skinny Puppy and Frontline Assembly, like just their visuals, and not only using their samples as well.
A very underrated horror movie I always bring up is from the 90s, the movie Hideaway, which had an all industrial soundtrack. If you've ever seen that one, it's great. It's got Die Warsaw, Sister Machine Gun, all kinds of industrial bands in it, and it stars a young Jeff Goldblum. So,
oh, that's fantastic. I think I might have seen that, but I'm not exactly sure. I've seen a lot of horror movies. Like I usually watch Shudder and like Shudder TV. So whatever comes on, I'll watch it, like without really even caring about like what the name of the movie is. I just enjoy the visuals and the art behind it generally.
So you had this, kind of when you saw these movies, something in it, it spoke to you, and you transitioned that down the road. I like that you brought up Rick Baker, and because to me, I really prefer practical effects in horror movies. That's my, instead of so much CGI or green screen things, what I really love is something like an American Werewolf in London or something where it's just this awesome, cool, gory looking effect. And that's something that you got into and involved in. Tell me about kind of how that came about and how you started getting into doing these effects as a part of an aesthetic, and then, showing that off at, conventions, scene events, things like that.
Inspirations for doing a lot of horror stuff when I'm out in the scene. When I first started doing special effects, or like really getting into like makeup and playing around with the idea of creating something that I've seen in horror movies,
Mhm.
that started really with the Evil Dead movie,
Ooh.
and Army of Darkness. Looking at things like from like Sam Raimi and learning about how he created actual like blood, like stage blood,
Mhm.
that provoked me into learning how to do that myself. And that is a very messy process. I'm not
What
gonna
is
lie.
the key to a good stage blood?
Well, first and foremost, I'm gonna tell anybody this: if they're looking to make their own like Carol syrup kind of stage
Mhm.
blood, definitely put down a layer of Vaseline, because the moment that stuff dries, it's not very pleasant trying to take off. More than likely, you'll probably have to jump in the shower like with your clothing on to get it off, because it adheres to the skin. And think of it like a sugar wax. It's it's basically that, but not nearly as kind or pleasant. So think of it, you learn some very valuable lessons when starting to create your own like FX, and learning what works and what doesn't. And that simply does not work in large amounts, especially if it's covering a torso. So I learned a very valuable lesson with that one. As far as like the scene and going into like the industrial scene, there's a lot of people who've experienced a lot more than I have. um, I didn't start going to like places in Philly like Shampoo until I was already out of high school. And there was a lot of people that were going when they were teenagers, which I mean, that's fine, but I never really had that kind of,
Sure.
relationship with my parents to allow myself to go to places like that,
Right.
because the city pretty much scared my parents. So I was a little bit sheltered. I wasn't like exactly like in the scene, like in the scene. But
Yeah.
now I think over the years, people have grown to notice, as far as like my FX and things that I do that come out being the spooky bitch that I am now. Um, just going out and taking ideas from not only horror movies, but also like the goth aesthetic. So as far as like the Rivet heads, they've always like inspired me a little bit. Like I've told so many of my friends who used to dress spooky, like going to these like events and like, club scenes, like I'm like, you inspired me too. You know that, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
not just the cool one here. Like you're cool too. Like you inspired me to just like level up like what my appearance looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, today I'm fairly human. I was debating about looking spooky, but a little too tired.
I hear that. But give me an idea though, like say this was, you were going tomorrow to a convention that maybe you were going to be speaking at, or you were going to a concert of, Stoneburner, Ego Likeness, something like that. Um, what would be an idea of kind of what is the transformation or what you do when you're going all out to like pull off some kind of a look to go to an event?
Well, I do have a go-to demon character that I like to revisit from time to time.
Mhm.
It's a lot of black and a lot of white. It's a lot of like very harsh lines on the face. I mean, I'm not gonna say that they're um like kabuki kind of style, but like it's more or less trying to make my appearance look more linear, or having the lines drawn on my face is more to like narrow out my skin to make it more corpse like. Corpse paint is also another like huge reference in metal that I try to like take little bits and pieces from. I mean, I've definitely had a few people make comments about how my demon original character takes things that are more tribalistic. And I don't see it personally, and I don't use any reference photos. I just go by the lines on my face. I try to look for shapes, and that's what I'm pretty much drawing on my face. So if people have taken like any of my characters as being like saying pulling from a certain culture, I'm not for that.
Sure.
Not at all. Like there's people in the goth scene that are, you know, taking heavy hits for looking the way they do, especially like was that social repos or whatever that guy is, but he's kind of a horrible person.
I don't
Um,
know anything about that person or the story.
it's a long story that has nothing to do with me. But as far as like a culturally appropriating certain looks
Sure.
and stuff,
I
I,
think that
I
is
don't I
something to
don't fit
think
into
about
that.
and be careful of when you're, especially if you're doing an aesthetic or a character. It's something you really have to take into mind. And I think also be open to feedback on. Maybe like you said, you
I
had
do.
no idea, you were just kind of following the lines of your face
Exactly.
and working on doing this character from your imagination that was speaking to you, but maybe you don't think about until someone says, hey, I feel a certain kind of way about this, what's happening. And then you can listen, take that feedback into account,
Thank
and be sensitive to things like that. But you're right. I mean, sometimes there's a reason why these looks or whatnot became cultural phenomenon, and it's probably because it was cool. And so other people like seeing things and thinking that was cool, you might have your eye drawn in the same way, I imagine.
Well, since having certain conversations about like, you know, cultural appropriations and like certain kind of looks and things like that, I've learned to edit and try to change certain appearances as far as like the demon look and as far as like the linear lines. I've omitted simply because of that reason. Because the last thing I want to do is try to like draw something on my face. I'm trying to look scary, but the last thing I want to do is take that level of horror to where it's going to be offensive to somebody. You know what I mean? So
Right.
like my original character ideas had like, you know, lines going down my face. So instead of using lines, I'll use blood instead. So it actually
Yeah.
looks more horrific than saying using certain lines to push any kind of, you know, offensiveness.
Sure,
I
sure.
mean, I'll still be offensive, but it won't be in that way.
It won't be to a culture, it's to society as a whole, is what you're going for.
Exactly. I want to be more terrifying, but not in terrifying as in where somebody's gonna accidentally mistake what I look like
Sure.
as, you know, something that's going to be a stereotype later on. I don't want that. I absolutely don't want that.
No, no, of course not. So, in addition to, I mean, you talked about the makeup and whatnot and the look, whether you're doing it for yourself or someone else, are there any kind of like prosthetics that you've ever worked with or tried? Have you ever done, I know you're into, don't you do work in what, in piercing? Is that
Yeah.
correct? Yeah. So, I mean, body modification, anything like that that you've done that was really cool and interesting, to try and really alter your appearance in that way?
Well, actually, as far as like the body mods and things like that, yes, I have one specific one that's pretty horrific that people don't really notice that I have until I actually show them, and that's my forked tongue.
What? Holy crap. I
So
didn't.
that's probably the most horrific body mod that I have. And when
Wow.
people actually like notice it, they're like, wait a minute.
Did that happen?
I'm like, yes, I have a snake's tongue. I do. So as far as like leveling up the idea of taking like FX and going to the more body modification kind of,
Yeah.
you know, aesthetic, that is definitely something I did. And that I think the next that I plan on doing, it's probably going to be some time, is probably getting my ears pointed. So
Oh, wow, wow. Now, see, that's taken the whole, this isn't just see, it's a way of life to a whole new level because
Yeah,
you're
like, I should just wake up looking like a demon all the time and
right.
not have to, like, put makeup on my face because my skin is really, really sensitive and it hates it. So the moment I do all those special effects that you see, people don't understand, like, the week after, like, I need to let my face breathe or,
Right.
I'm gonna break out severely. I mean, I use really great pro makeups, like, I don't use, like, the garbage stuff I used to use. I use a lot of Marin kind of products because it's a lot more gentle on my skin, but it's like, the day after, like, I could feel the oils in my skin just not happy.
Yeah. No, no, that I hear you there. I've been there too. So I want to shift gears a little bit now and kind of talk about because one of the things I'm interested in and I don't always get tapped into, like I said, you're on Shutter a lot. You're really I follow your posts on Facebook and things like that where you're kind of talking or reviewing new horror movies that you've seen. Why don't you tell me a little bit about a few things recently that you thought were really top of the top of the shelf, top of the order of modern horror that's doing something unique and interesting.
As far as like a lot of the newer horror, like I try to look at it as like a perspective of not like condemning people doing something different
Mhm.
or like the habitual like jump scares and things like that. I still kind of enjoy them. I mean that's kind of what I do when I'm out and about. Like I sneak up on people, so I'm always a jump scare.
I mean,
So
the jump scare is a classic. You can't go wrong with a good jump scare.
that's what I embody. So as far as like some of the newer movies, there's a few that I've been wanting to check out. I still haven't seen The Barbarian yet, but that's on my next list. The Menu is also another one that I really want to look at
I
because
almost
Ralph,
watched that last night, but I didn't yet.
he's so awesome as far as being an actor. So I'm really excited to see that movie. But
Yeah.
one of the newer movies I did see in the theaters was a movie called Smile.
I
Um,
heard about that, but I didn't know anything about it.
it just to give a brief synopsis and not give away
Yeah.
anything. Basically like you see like a lot of people like smiling throughout the movie, but it really has nothing to do with smiling or being genuine. It was has elements that are trigger warning as far as like suicide topics and things
Oh,
like that.
okay.
So
Yeah.
just bear that in mind.
Yeah.
But as far as like some of the actual like practical and special effects that they use in the movie was actually quite clever. And I like some of the buildup. Some of them are a little bit, you know, unsettling as far as if you have anything against like anything happening to animals. There's one specific scene that might be a little like off-putting.
Honestly, that is one of my most hated tropes in all of horror. It is one of the things that genuinely bothers me lately is when they get a cheap, we want to build the tension, but not kill off one of the characters yet, and they kill a cat or a dog. It always bugs the hell out of me lately when horror movies do that.
But the way they link this one specific scene, it makes sense. Um, so if you watch the movie, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So like as far as like certain things that might be triggering, that would be it. Suicide ideologies or talk can be it. But as far as like levels of dark, there's a lot of real life things that are very bothersome. So as far as like seeing that in a movie represented, it kind of opens that discussion to talk about certain things like that. So I think it's as much as it being a negative trope, it could also bring light to, certain things that actually do take place in reality and to have open discussions. That's the one thing people don't like. They don't like being uncomfortable. So
Right.
when you're talking about things like suicide, no one wants to have that discussion because they feel it's off-putting. And they're usually the response is like, I'm sorry you feel that way, and they carry about their day. But that's not really opening a discussion. So as far as horror, like taking these tropes and bringing them to light, I think it makes sense for people to start talking about stuff like that. You should, because otherwise you're just bottling up things that bother you. You
I
know what I
like
mean?
that. And I think that because the next thing I want to kind of ask you about and go into is what is it about horror that you or me, or that we have always found so fascinating? And I think, going along with what you just said, the idea of facing something that's horrific, like suicide or something like that, sometimes when placed in the context of a supernatural or a frightening thing, maybe that's just it. Going back to telling stories around a fire, like if you add that factor into it, you take something that's a little too real for you and make it somehow digestible. And maybe that's part of kind of what the mystique of horror is you adding in kind of these elements of something where there's an actual monster there. It makes it easier for people to face the metaphorical monsters or demons that exist in their lives.
For me personally, like as much as horror is very represented in the goth industrial scene, I've always looked at horror as being very punk rock. As
Sure,
far
it
as
always
like
has.
them
Yeah.
being political, being outspoken, being in your face, it's very much brutal. And
The whole George
like,
Romero thing of like zombies and like people just being kind of sheep or not awake in this. There's a lot of context of political horror.
it's like layers of onions. There's definitely so many layers behind horror movies and
Yeah.
why they were created. I mean, a lot of them were taken from, serial killers. Now, I know a lot of that can be a sensitive topic because there has been, the recent, movies and, things put out on like Netflix with like Dahmer and things like that,
Yeah.
which I can understand from a victim's point of view. Like I've been through my own personal horrors, um, as far as like things happening to family members and things like that. So as far as identifying with, somebody being taken from you too soon, I can understand, the outcry from, victims or families victims and things like that, like as far as them speaking out against making these types of programs. But at the same time, I can also look at it from a perspective of we shouldn't forget about instances that has happened.
Yeah.
We shouldn't, because this gives the newer generations who didn't know anything about Dahmer a better reflection as far as what kind of things to look out for. You know what I mean? Like the red flags, how to spot them. I mean, yeah, it's meant to be like entertaining, but at the same time, like entertainment is also supposed to be educational.
Right. No, it is true. And kind of going back to the question before of what is it that people love to be frightened, love to be scared as a society? Going back to literature or whatnot, or like I said, even stories around a campfire, people like to be frightened. It makes you feel alive and all. So what are some of
Chemical
the things?
release. It's the
Yeah,
chemical release, like going on a roller coaster. It's a chemical release, or exercising. It's the chemical release.
yeah,
That's what you're striving for. You're striving for that like actual attainable happiness that you get from that chemical release.
sure.
Because at the end of the day, happiness is what you really make it, right? But as far as like that chemical release, it's like instant gratification of having like everything make sense all at once. You know what I mean?
I,
Like you
I
want to
think too, outside of the,
be horrified, but you're cracking up at the end of the day, like, I can't believe that scared the shit out of me. Like, what? Like,
I think there's
it's funny.
that. And I also think it's, I don't know, to me, beyond the chemical, like a little bit psychological of the people in horror movies are usually dumb, like kind of comical and or just awful, right? And so you
Yeah.
see people, it's kind of almost whatever, like people watching the Kardashians or something. Like you're not watching it like rooting for them. You're watching
Oh,
this because
I'm team villain all the way, Ken. Like
yeah, like
100%.
I don't want to
I've
see any.
always been that person for a long time as being team villain. And I think that kind of bothers people. But at the same time, like if you watch certain movies like what was it? The Lodge. you basically hate every single character, and you're just like, I hope you all die.
I
Like,
can't wait for
like
you
you
to.
don't want to say that out loud, but at the same time, like you're just awful. Like you're despicable. Like you're
Yeah.
awful.
And then there's the trope of the last girl or whatever, the idea that there's at least one redeemable or likable character for you to actually root for and hope for to come through it and be okay. But everybody else pretty much you're like, yeah, like they got that because they were being idiots, and I would never be that dumb. And now I kind of feel a little bit of life affirmation watching these fools get chopped up with a machete because they were being idiots or something.
I might say something that might piss people off.
I do that all the time.
I'm good at doing that, but I'm gonna say it. As far as Laurie Strode, for Halloween,
Okay.
yes, she is an amazing actress. Don't get me wrong. I really love her. I love Jamie Lee Curtis. But as far as like her character, deep down, every single one of you kind of wants Michael to win. You kind of do. And if you really think about it, without really giving it away, as far as like the Halloween series, Michael kind of does, if you think about it,
I think that
because it's all
you're
subliminal
okay
stuff.
with a Halloween spoiler at this point. People have had 35 years or so to catch up on that one. So I think you're okay with giving away slight plot details.
Well, no, like I haven't actually. I'll be honest with you. I haven't seen the very last one. I
Oh, really?
haven't seen the very last one.
I
I
did go
haven't
see
even
it.
read any reviews. No, nothing. But I could just tell, like, as far as like where they were going with the idea, um, that everybody embodies some form of evil in one way or another,
Yeah.
and that makes 100% sense. Like, there's not one person that exists on this planet that's like 100% good or 100% evil. Absolutely not. I don't. I've never believed in that. Sure, like there are very dangerous and predatory type of people,
Yep.
and those people don't deserve any type of redemption. But who is it as people to redeem anybody? You know what I mean? Like
Oh
I
no, I,
never.
I get your point, and I think that's a big part of it. I think the other thing in modern horror that sometimes is tough for me is that place between frightening, scary, and then say like a Eli Roth or like Rob Zombie, something, but which feels more like torture porn to me, which isn't my kind of horror, isn't something I enjoy because it's not as much based on, like I said, this kind of like my favorite horror movie of all time would be like Hill House, Haunting of Hill with Vincent Price. Like just
Uh,
the
he's
you're
one of the kings of horror.
yeah,
Of
you're
course.
sitting alone in this house and you're watching this movie, and it's not like you see Godzilla bust through the wall. You see the curtain rustle. You see like breath become a little bit visible in these tiny, subtle ways. And then you start looking around your own house and hearing the floorboard creak in the basement or something like that. And the hairs on your neck start coming out. To me, that's my favorite kind of horror. And sometimes I feel like, uh, I don't know, doing the extreme, and it can take away from that ability to create horror because it's just there's nothing to the imagination. There it is for you right in front of your face in horrific detail.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to like even movies, like I was saying, like the original Halloween, you didn't see the shape, you didn't see anything. It was just all mental. So as far as like a lot of all mental kind of horror, I really A24 is really great at grabbing people as far as like the mental aspects. I like the visual just because of more of the artistic ability. And talking about Eli Roth, like he's a phenomenal director, like as far as creating horror. Like he puts some very interesting visuals in his work, but
Mhm.
he also uses a lot of things that can be real life.
Right.
Like hostile movies, like
That's
there
kind of what I
are
was thinking of the stuff where
there
I'm
are
like,
things that take place in real life humanity that is bought and sold, trading people and things like that. That still goes on today, even though people try to not think about stuff like that.
And
But
that's what I worry a little bit is the case like that, like, because that's a real thing in real life, are you making it seem like supernatural or something that doesn't happen when you kind of do it in a movie like that? Like it makes it feel more surreal, I think, in some ways.
I mean, that's the same thing with utilizing blood and stuff in horror movies. If you see blood in horror movies, it looks really real. But when you look at real life situations or real life gore, it looks nothing like that.
Right.
It really doesn't. It looks
True.
more cartoonish. If you've ever seen anything in real life or any kind of like horrific scenes in real life, it doesn't look anything like a horror movie at all.
Huh.
Like horror movies look real and real life looks fake, if that makes
That's
sense.
hilarious. That's, I don't know, that's crazy and interesting. All right, I want to turn gears a little bit again, and bring it back a little bit to the music discussion. And we talked a little bit earlier about how there's this overlap between industrial goth, just music in general, and horror movies. What are some of the ways it's gone the other way that you think, where music that you think has been a bit inspired, and maybe Rob Zombie that we talked about is kind of a good example of that, but where imagery and ideas from horror movies, do you think that influences, and you will be listening to an album or a record or show or something, and you'll think that there's a reference or something to, a popular horror movie? I know in industrial it's easy because of samples. You can
Sorry.
one
My
sample.
Sophie is like trying to make a guest appearance. She always does that. If I'm ever
That's
on the
okay.
phone, we're doing a Zoom call, she's like forever. She has to be the
Come
center
never
of it.
say hello.
Come here, you weirdo.
Usually a cat comes in and gets me too. Oh, hello.
Yeah,
Hello.
that's one thing. Me, Donna, and Steven have something in common. We both have a cat named Sophie, and this is the lovable mug.
I love Sophie so much. And
She's
speaking of
fat.
which, you can shout out behind you there, the painting. Show, I know you have quite a collection of them from Stephen.
Oh yeah. I feel like I feel like I don't have enough, actually, to be honest.
I
A
hear.
lot of the works that I have from him, I actually have hanging in my piercing studio, just so I can make more room for my walls here. So I'm actually going to start working on putting them up in my room. I only have like 3, so that means I'm going to have to start making more space for more art, since all my other paintings are now in the new studio.
So speaking of which, I
You were
want you to
talking
real
about
quick.
the industrial and horror links and stuff,
Yeah.
inspirations. Well, you mentioned Rob Zombie, sure. But as far as like inspirations, as far as like horror and industrial really linked, I'm gonna have to go with Skinny Puppy again, because
Yeah.
they've definitely pulled a lot of like George A. Romero kind of references. And they've always like been really big on like Dario Argento and
Mhm.
movies like that. Like as far as like their aesthetic, they pulled a lot of horror too, like just their visuals, like using a lot of like stage blood and mud and all kinds of goop.
Or even like a Geiger type, stuff that I would say in some of their cover art or whatnot kind of has that, effect to it or look to it.
Oh, like the artists that they use, like Stephen Gilmore
Yeah.
is one of them. I Brain Eater is another. Alan Yeager is another. They have incredible artworks.
Yeah.
I Brain Eater is responsible for a lot of this stuff on Too Dark Park, which I actually have some of it tattooed
Oh,
on my
wow.
arm. So like as far as like horror in industrial, like Skinny Puppy, I think is like almost reigning king when it comes to that. Just
I would
because
put them up there. I'd say maybe Goblins would be another one, but yeah, there's quite a few like that. But I would say Skinny Puppy's near the top for sure.
just watch their music videos. Their music videos will definitely haunt your dreams or nightmares, whichever. And namely one that I can think of, Stairs and Flowers.
Yeah.
That is like all done in black and white, but it doesn't look horrific. But like the way it's done in black and white, it looks very grotesque and very harsh.
Yeah.
So and like their backing videos that they would use for like live performances, they pull a lot of horror stuff as far as visuals,
Yeah.
or they'll pull on props like their dog Chud that they got arrested for pretty much performing a vivisection on like a fake dog. But
Whoa.
like their topics made sense. You know what I mean? It is real life horror that's taking place to animals, and they're trying to point that out. You know what I mean? So there are real life horrors that musicians use, and Skinny Puppy has been known for that, especially for like political use and things like that too. So they're definitely reigning champs when it comes to really being specific in their imagery and for what purpose.
You brought up a minute ago your shop. For starters, why don't you tell people in the area what shop you're at if they want to come in to get a piercing or modification of some kind?
Sure. Currently, I am their body piercer. I work at Upper Darby Inkwell
Mhm.
currently.
Where's it at?
It's in Upper Darby, well, Drexel Hill area. So as far as like the address, I don't have that.
No, I meant more just, yeah, it's in the
It's in
Baltimore area.
Philadelphia. Well,
Or
it's
Philadelphia.
outside of Philadelphia. So if you're going through the city and then you take 676, it's like a little bit outside of the city. So it's not exactly city limits.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is, do you have any events or art pieces or anything coming up that you're going to be doing soon that maybe people could come check out and see some of what you do?
Yeah, actually, February 10th, me and a few friends put together, we have an industrial night called Ritual that we have every month. It's usually it was on every like third Friday, but we're changing like the dates for right now. The next one that's coming up is February 10th.
Mhm.
And the event that I plan on, doing for that, normally I would do like live painting and things like that, like horror art and stuff like that. But I actually am using a live model this time. So her name is Julie Bells.
Mhm.
Uh, she's a burlesque dancer as well as like a pole dancer. She's incredibly stunning. So using her as a canvas
Yeah, that's always
is quite
cool.
interesting. A full body paint, like that's the first time I've ever done that. So that's gonna be quite challenging. But as far as like working with a live model, I mean live models, they move. But I'm used
Yeah.
to, doing body piercing where people like have a reaction or like they freak out a little bit. So I'm kind of used to that. So
But also that idea, I mean, when it's you're doing it to yourself, you know how you're going to move it. But when you're dealing with another person, it's a whole other level of communication, I imagine.
all
And
unpredictable.
yeah,
Piercing is different because people were scared, but when it comes to art or anything like that, I've worked on drunk people when doing special effects. So, I mean, if anything that's hard to do, I would say handling people who are inebriated and trying to make up their face like a zombie or something like
it was
that.
like herding
That was
cats.
probably the hardest. And that was definitely during an industrial event a few years back.
Yeah.
So I'm like, just sit still, but like I'm constantly like readjusting their head, or it can be a nightmare. But working with a live model, I'm gonna tell her just make sure that you slow your roll if you plan on drinking. Just
Or we
pace
won't get through
yourself,
this thing.
because
That's all.
otherwise I'm gonna have a hard time, and we're both gonna have a hard time. So it's gonna
Wonderful.
be interesting.
All right. So the last thing here too is we're a music review page first and foremost. And so I always like to hear whether it's a performing artist or a band or a DJ, or in this case, just that you're inspired by the scene. What is one or two things that you've been listening to lately that you've really enjoyed or has inspired you in the modern music scene?
Well, as far as like modern music and all that stuff, like I've really been paying attention to a lot of your reviews,
Well,
and I've been
thanks.
taking notice and making notes as to what kind of bands I really do want to check out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot on the list that I still want to look at. As of recent stuff that I've been listening to. A lot of the new Stoneburner stuff I've really been listening to, and
Everything Steven's done
it's
on
not just a
COP.
bias or anything. They're really great friends, but
Yeah.
he's an incredible artist. Like, as far as like we were talking about like horror and you know, things that inspired me, like he's definitely, you know, with a lot of his posts and things like that have really inspired me to get back into doing what I do.
Yeah.
Like, I took a long hiatus from doing like painting and drawing and things like that. So he's definitely like encouraged a lot of that to start coming back out. So it's nice.
I would say Steven and Stoneberger are an incredible example as well of a very narrative form of music. I think more than just about anybody short of, you know, like we talked about Skinny Puppy back in the day, but Stoneburner is really kind of with every album telling some kind of apocalyptic like tale that has, you know, ideas that are themes and, you know, linked together. And so from that standpoint, Stoneburner really is music. I think ties really well into almost like I picture a movie in my head whenever I listen to it.
Oh, 100%. Like, especially like the one thing I'm actually really excited to see. Steven's been working on a like graphic novel,
Yeah.
and just like looking at some of these images, like it's pretty. I'm excited for this one. This one, I think this one's going to be big. Honestly, I really think it's going to be big. It's going to be very. I'm just really excited. And it's not because like they're friends of mine. It's like the art involved. Like, like I said, I'm very visual. I like a lot of the visual aspects. And any band that's going to bring not just music but visuals to the table,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's going to catch my attention pretty quickly.
Is there anybody else before we go here that you have been listening to or kind of wanted to shout out that you think has been doing something cool or interesting in music?
Well, the one person I would like to pay respects to, you actually interviewed her not very long ago with the Unconvention, is Chloe.
Yeah,
Chloe
Chloe.
K. Like, she's an awesome friend first and
Yeah.
foremost, and it's her and my friend DJ Shock that
Mhm.
are putting together the night ritual,
Oh,
which
cool.
is to try and keep like a healthy and safe space for people
Yeah.
for in the scene, because there has been a lot of problematic type of, you know, people in the industry and in the scene. So like we want to try and give an outlet for people to feel safe and feel comfortable. And you know, these are the type of artists and, you know, DJs that need to be prevalent in the scene, to be taken notice to, just because they are trying to make sure that people feel safe. You know, when I was going to the club when I was in my earlier 20s and like teenage years, there was a lot of predators or predatory behavior, and there wasn't really much said about it until like we got older. Like, oh, that's normalized now, but it's not.
Right.
So we're trying to make sure that like when you come to ritual, you're going to feel included, you're going to feel safe, you're not going to feel like you're being judged, and you're also not going to have to deal with anybody who's going to be like predatory at all.
Right.
And if anybody were to come up to you at any of our events and they start making you feel uncomfortable, come see us, because we'll make sure that never happens. We'll boot them right out the door. And it's a zero policy for stuff like that. So
I love when we
give her a
talked
lot of
about that
respect to
with
some
them
of the other
about unconvention.
conventions.
Yeah. And I love that you shouted that out because you're right. That is so important in our scene now because due to the things you're talking about, whether it's the horror scene, the goth scene, the fetish community, the all of those things, these are places that have allowed dark cracks for the wrong people to slip in through and hide in. And we as a scene need to get together and as a whole, like you said, make sure that we're shining a light to not allow a place for anything like that in our scene so that everybody can be welcome and safe there, and not have to worry about looking over their shoulder when they're trying to dance and have a good time.
Exactly. And that's the type of environment we like to provide. That's stuff that I've been doing over the years too, is like taking notice to like anybody who's been problematic in the scene and making sure that these people are no longer included.
Yeah.
I can list off a bunch of names, but then I'll be throwing myself under the bus of being responsible for them not doing certain things. So I'm not going to give away like any of that kind of stuff because, ow, okay.
Oh goodness. Oh goodness.
So that's fun.
Was that the jump scare you were talking about? Were you saving
Well,
up that jump scare?
guess what? I think I just provided the jump scare for you. See, it's because I leaned back and I knocked the painting over. That's what happened. So I
I love
gotta
it.
make something a little bit scary, even if it wasn't intentional.
That was awesome. No, I love it. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad that we got to talk because we never talked in person before. We have DM back and forth.
No, it's mainly
never.
just been online comments here and there,
Yeah.
and you,
So
you get a little bit of my sass here and there, and I promise you, it's never malicious.
no.
Ever, unless it's somebody being really down and dirty, then I'll 100% have your back. I enjoy bullying the bullies because they fear me, I think.
Well, this has been wonderful talking to you, Stacy. I look
I'm
forward. I
sorry,
hope everybody.
Stephen. There's nothing wrong with the painting. It just fell behind me.
Yeah, it's good. I see it. Um, I hope this was informative for everybody, and I thought it was a great discussion about the scene and how it overlaps with the horror movie genre. Look for us to do more things like this on Sounds and Shadows, where I'm trying to get people to talk about, I don't know, scene adjacent things that like relate to music and are a part of it, but just different perspectives than just bands or artists, coming on here. So I hope everybody enjoyed. Please like and subscribe. This is important to us. And Stacy, it was an utter pleasure having you on today.
It was a pleasure. And if you guys are in the Philly area, February 10th, come out and see me do a live painting on a live model. So
Excellent.
And maybe I'll provide more jump scares later on.
I hope everybody does that. And from us at Sounds and Shadows, keep it dark, yo.
can see it, boys. Good show.